welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. I am delighted to continue on this journey with all of you listening. If you're new to the podcast, I always welcome everyone to take good care of yourself throughout, push pause. Self-care is everything. And we always are deep in trauma and talking about hard things. But always on the other side, I feel like we get to all the best things, strength and fortitude and so much more. So I'm going to welcome our guest today. You're going to love hearing her empowering story and hopefully someday reading her book. So Tricia Gray is the CEO and founder of Aditus Partners and the author of a very anticipated memoir. I think it's coming out around the time we release the podcast. It's called A Lotus Legacy. After rising above the tragic loss of her mother to a domestic abuse, she transformed her own pain into a life of extraordinary purpose. She became a top-tier healthcare executive and the governing board president for Women in Health Administration of Southern California. Her story is a very powerful roadmap for anyone looking to bloom through, I like how she writes the mud and bloom through the mud. That's such a great, I can see I'm thinking lily pads or I'm not sure, like coming right out of the earth and redefining your own future. So we are so honored to have with us Tricia. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Katie. I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be here to speak to your audience.
Yeah, for sure. I always ask, I know a lot of your story takes place in your childhood. So where were you and what was your family structure like at that point?
Absolutely. So I am born, raised, and bred in southern Louisiana, this place, small town called New Roads, Louisiana. Shout out to people in New Roads, Louisiana, but it's right outside of Baton Rouge. And so born and raised there, southern girl, small town community, small town feel. Let's see, I left Louisiana when I was probably about 20, 21 years old. So spent a lot of my time in the community in Louisiana.
So if you were going to paint a picture, like how far from Baton Rouge is the town where you grew up? Is it an hour drive or?
It's about I want to say it's about a 30 to a 45 minute drive, probably closer to a 30-minute drive. So Baton Rouge is where we went for all of our shopping. You know, there's the malls, the restaurants, the movie theaters. And unfortunately, in a small town, we didn't have access to those types of things in terms of entertainment. So Baton Rouge would be the closest town or city we could go to really enjoy some recreational activities.
Absolutely. I totally get that. I feel like nowadays people have a lot of things at their fingertips, but the old fashioned brick and mortar things that we need that can't be delivered on demand.
That's right.
They still take going to. And I love, we're at the age where you would go roller skating and like bowling was a thing. Like there were I know some people still do these things, but it was like when you wanted to see your friends, you have an activity, you go into town.
There was an activity, exactly.
Right?
But to your point, everything is at your fingertips. We don't even have to go to a movie theater anymore. We can access the movies online and so on and so forth.
Group watch parties. It's crazy. It's awesome, but they're missing out a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think to your, as we talk about your story, I kind of juxtapose, I started with that thought because I'm thinking about, growing up with violence in the home, you can become so much more isolated and it can be hidden so much better in some ways, even though we have cameras and recording devices everywhere. I still feel like Well, maybe all the listening devices, Alexa should have like a built-in like warning mode when it hears
Oh,
violence. Like,
wow.
wouldn't that
That's
be crazy?
great. That's a great idea.
I know.
Don't say it online. Keep that to yourself.
Yeah, well, I'll go petition them. Take Back the Night's gonna have something to say about this. But, like I feel like a lot of things that we're gonna talk about are really important in thinking about how can we keep working to end sexual violence in all forms and also support survivors. And I think well, let's talk about your story, and then we can think together with our listeners about like
Absolutely.
what should we be doing better or more of to better have accountability. So you're in Louisiana, and I also love Louisiana. Is such a unique state. Haven't spoken there a few times, but not actually in a lot of the more rural places, because I feel like when I've been there, the communities are really, I won't say isolated, but they have their own very, very distinct personalities.
Absolutely.
That's different from even next door in Mississippi or Texas. Like, it's just definitely Louisiana's its own little place.
Absolutely. And it's what I would say when I think about my hometown, those were some of the best and obviously some of my worst experiences growing up in a small town. The good is, when you grow up in those types of areas, using your term rural communities, there's such a great sense of family there.
Right.
And I write that in my book a lot. I reference in my book a lot about the family structure. And a family doesn't necessarily mean the people you share bloodline with. Family is the next door neighbor who looks out after you when your parents or your grandparents are out of the house. It's just such a strong sense of community. And I get goosebumps when I think about it, because it is, they surround you with protection, support, and love. And because I come from such a big family, my grandparents had 11 kids, and they had a whole team. I tell people, when you grow up in the country, there's nothing else to do but procreate. And so my grandparents were great stewards of procreation. So we have a very big family. But even outside of my immediate family, if you will, those 11 kids, grandkids, and great grandkids, the next door neighbor or someone down the street is also considered what we call a cousin. It's like everybody is a cousin in Louisiana. If you're related to someone who is related to someone, then it's a cousin, it's a distant cousin. So it's just that sense of not even necessarily camaraderie, but community and family that exists. We pool our resources together. To your point, access to resources and things like that oftentimes are a challenge, but typically what happens in those types of communities is we rely on one another. And so it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful struggle, if you will.
Right. I think so. And I think people didn't realize, like, it's going to be such a, like, to listen to our conversation and also go into the world of AI, replacing humans, doing things.
That's right.
But, I just don't know how quickly we're going to get there. But I love the picture you painted of the family, because I also think the flip side is when families protect secrets that they shouldn't, right? So let's keep going. So you grew up there, and did you have siblings too?
Yes. So I am the oldest of four.
Okay.
I have a sister who is right behind me, and then I've got two brothers. So my mother had 4 kids in total.
Okay. And was it kind of like, 1 year apart, or, was there a gap?
We were pretty close in age. My sister is my sister's about 2 years younger than me. And then the boys are about 2 years apart, if you will. So there was a break in time. And then she picked up with 2 kids. So it's a total of 4 of us. 2 of them still live in Louisiana. And then, of course, I branched out eventually. And then I have another brother who lives in Nevada. So our family was pretty average in terms of size. So when you're talking 11 kids, on average, most of my grandparents' kids had about 3 to 4 kids.
Okay.
So big family, very big family.
And then what kinds of things were you, I mean, I assume how big was the school? Was it one big complex, or did you have like a middle school and an elementary? Like, what was that
Yes.
like?
So I am the first graduating class of a new school they built in 1992 in right outside of my hometown. So they basically bus a bunch of kids from different, I'll call them towns,
Mm-hmm.
small rural communities. They bust us all into one high school. But, we had an elementary school, there was a magnet school, I don't think there was a middle school. So it was elementary and I think high school at the time. But in terms of the high school, because there were so many surrounding towns or rural communities, they just bust us into one big high school. And they built that school. And I was among the first in the graduating class to graduate from that school. So again, very small town feel. I write in my book, it's interesting because we had, when I think about it, obviously poverty was a consideration, right? In those
Mm-hmm.
communities. And I wasn't excluded from it. So we grew up in a community where my mother, we had limited access to resources. So, my mother didn't start working until she was probably 5 years before her death. And so I grew up on welfare. I grew up with government assistance, and obviously that brings a different set of challenges. And it wasn't just my family. There were several families in that community because, when you grow up in rural communities like that, the job market isn't booming. Like, there's
No. Yeah, where are you going to work?
where are you going to work? There's a local,
Yeah.
especially in Louisiana, you get a lot of like the plants, the major plants and things like that. So that's considered a good job. Or there's some retail opportunities, some fast food opportunities. And obviously the town has grown since then. But back then in the 80s, like there wasn't a lot of access to things like that. And God knows there wasn't access to great employment. So, needless to say, my mother was on welfare and she raised us on the welfare system. So we just didn't have a lot of those things at our fingertips.
It makes total sense. And what was your dad's work?
Well, interesting story. And I'm not going to go too far into it because I'm actually going to do a book number 2. But at the time, growing up as a child, I didn't know who my father was. Yeah.
Okay.
So
That's
that
a big statement now, Trish. That was like a mic drop right there. What?
Yeah, so that is a mic. So that is a
Okay.
story all in its own. Of course, fast forward, I have a relationship with my dad now, but growing up as a child, I had no idea who my dad was. In fact, my mother, you have to consider the time and consider the setting. But at the time, my mother never even told me who he was. I thought my dad died. And I didn't find out until right before my mother passed away. And after she passed away, I didn't even find out that my father was in fact alive. He still lived in Louisiana. It was a tough breakup. From what I was told, she was heartbroken. She was angry and bitter because the relationship didn't work out. So I grew up not knowing who my father was. And not only did I not know who he was, I thought he was deceased, and he was in fact alive.
Was he the father for your siblings too?
Nope.
Different.
Mm-mm.
But for your sister?
Nope.
No. So you
Nope.
only had one. Okay. Everybody else had a different dad.
Yep.
Same
Yep.
other dad?
Yep. So everybody had a different father. Just again, in those times, growing up in those types of communities,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't uncommon, if you will, if I can say that. It wasn't necessarily uncommon, and that's pretty much the way it was. So obviously, the oldest. By the time my sister came along, my mother had moved on to obviously another relationship. I had no idea who my dad was. I didn't meet my dad, and I'm not going to give too much information because there will be a book number 2, but I didn't meet my dad until well after my mother had passed away.
And just going to go back to one thing, Tricia, like when you said everybody had a different dad, do you mean there were 4 different dads or just?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I
Yes.
don't want to mess that up in my head.
Yep.
Okay, that's like
Yep.
totally gotcha.
Yep.
I feel like that could have been a lot of communities at that time too.
Mhm.
Especially when you're talking about poverty and like, what do we what are we going to do? And who do we trust
Yes.
as women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially, once you have one, then who's going to care? Unless you have the other family right around, everyone's going to pile in with Mima and Grandma and cool
Yes.
auntie number 3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's,
Exactly. And as I'm thinking about it, it's unfortunate, but it's real.
mhm.
There are families out there, there are adults, children out there who don't come from what one would consider a healthy family background. And unfortunately or fortunately, the way however you want to think about it, I was one of those children where I grew up where there were several different circumstances that had the potential to totally destroy me. The fact that,
Mm.
I did not know who my father was. Until I was an adult. The fact that, my mother was in multiple unhealthy relationships, might I
Yeah,
add. So
that's what I
it
was
was just,
gonna ask. I mean, I
yeah,
feel like, and then you're the child. That's why I'm so excited to, talk with you, Tricia, because we need to think about the children too, right? And so many of my guests just in the last couple months, like they were in the abusive relationship. They were the mother. Their baby was, 1, and it was like the light bulb goes on, and they're seeing from their child's eyes what's going on. And
that's right.
yeah, so you are
Yes.
now, it's going to be perfect because I'll try and put you all in the right order, because you're the child who grew up.
I am the
um,
child, and I've said that
yeah.
to so many people, Katie. I think, when we talk about breaking the cycle, whatever the cycle
Hmm.
is, whether it's domestic violence, whatever it is, when we talk about breaking the cycle, a lot of times, and I think there's value and it's absolutely imperative, we make sure that we provide resources to mom, right? Or to the parent. We
Right.
make sure to provide those resources and, food, shelter, safety. Those are the basic needs. We make sure those are provided. But I always tell people, I don't necessarily think we put the same amount of rigor around how we provide support to the child. And when we talk about
Right.
breaking the cycle, that's the cycle. That's the core, the crux.
Right.
The person who is standing in the corner, silent, watching these things play out, they have an opportunity. They have to make a decision at some point as an adult. Either they're going to follow in the same pathway or they choose to break the cycle. So that's where it
Right.
starts. That's the core.
Right. And it's like, well, for our listeners, I wear all these different hats, but we're finally getting to a place where when I started speaking and I was close to age 18, and I would go and I was like, oh, we need to talk to 18-year-olds and college students. But then you start to realize, like, what about the kids who are 8 years old? Like, what
Right.
about the kids who are growing up already seeing bad things and
Exactly.
normalizing them, right? So
Exactly.
such
Yeah.
and I developed like a whole curriculum, and I am hopeful more and more schools will pick it up because there's such a reticence to talk about these things, which is why
Right.
your book is going to be so important with young children. They are the
That's right.
recipient of like all the unhealthiness, and the faster we can give them something normative, right? That is the healthy ideal. Well, let's talk. So, as you're, young, and this, I guess must have been. Well, tell us like when you were growing up and when you started noticing things, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you,
Yeah.
if,
Yeah.
maybe it was just, and maybe your brain didn't. I'm curious about this. Like, when you started noticing this unhealthiness, how did your mind back then categorize it? Because I think that's really important. Like, you were like, oh, that's just parents? Or was there any little part of you that was like, oh, I need to leave, or my stomach is sick? Like, how did it impact you? That's what I'm asking. Like,
Absolutely. So I would say as a child, when things are unhealthy. And you kind of alluded to this a minute ago. There is this feeling, and I talked about a specific incident that happened in the book where there was a sick feeling in my stomach as a little girl. So I can
mhm,
remember as far back as being in, like, let's say kindergarten, first grade, my first time that I could recall experiencing DV. And my mother was in a relationship, intimate partner relationship, was not my father or any of my siblings' fathers. She was young. She had a little girl.
And
and
you're about 5 or 6, you think?
yeah, I'm about 5 or 6 at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And so I can recall a specific incident where there was an exchange between her and her intimate partner, and I write this in my book. You hear the screams,
Oh,
the pleading, the begging. And so, as a child, if you can imagine being in the other room, having to witness this, having to hear your mother cry and beg and plead, the range of emotions that just overtake you, it's nothing short of overwhelming. So when we talk about DV is not, when you ask me the question, how did I know? You can't miss it. You
mhm.
hear the cries, you hear the screams, you hear the thuds, you hear the fall. My mother, even though I was so young, I tell people, and I even wrote it in my book, my mother was, because I was one of the oldest, I had a certain role. And typically when you grow up in
Mm,
those types of homes, each child serves a different role. And me being the oldest, I was the protector. And so that means anytime there was an exchange and she was in a bad situation or she was being physically abused in that moment. And the one thing that I hated that she would do, even as a child, she would call my name, yell
oh,
for me to come and help her.
oh
And so
gosh.
how paralyzing is
Mm,
that? That was my role. I was her protector, because much of our journey, much of her journey with domestic violence, I was a little girl. So I was introduced to domestic violence in elementary school because of the cry, the scream, the plead, the fight, the thud. So all of the theatrics, if you will, I experienced at a very young age. But then as I got older, and I had siblings who came behind me, I was still the firstborn, which means the role I had assumed was protector. So to hear your mother scream and cry and yell for you specifically, to hear her say, Tricia, help me. Like,
mm,
and to be a little girl and to feel paralyzed, not being able to help your mother. Like, can you imagine what that would feel like? And so that
mhm,
was when you ask, my first memory, and what does it feel like and how did I know? Oh, you know the
mhm.
situation. And so as a little girl, I learned about domestic violence at a very young age, a very young age.
Yeah, I'm wondering when you're 5 and you younger sister's now 3, and there might have been a baby on the way, right? So how were you can you remember thinking, "Where's my little sister?" Or no, it was
Different dynamic, Katie. Different
oh,
dynamic. I
different.
mean, this
Okay.
story, my story was probably it's got like memoir after memoir
Okay.
on top of it. My sister and I didn't grow up in the same home. My
Okay.
mother put my sister up for adoption.
Oh
So
gosh.
I didn't even
Okay.
learn who my sister was until I was probably in late elementary, early junior high age. So I didn't even know who she was. So for most
Okay,
of
I'm glad
my
I asked that
yeah,
because
it just
I'm
the
just
plot just
picturing I'm
thickens.
just like I'm really trying my way of trying to understand stories and people like all my life, Trisha, ever since like I was getting told stories. That's why we have the Dear Katie. Dear Katie, please write back. Like I've been hearing stories since I was 18 as this like national victim. And
Uh-huh.
so I always like I'm very visual and like try and put the whole picture together because I feel like
Mhm.
if I can see and feel a little bit, it helps me understand more of like your whole not that I'll ever get you in like an hour, but at least
Yeah,
I can try to like help our listeners too as they're trying to like unpack different pieces of their survivorship. So it just helps me like I'm always thinking like who was there, what was the like surrounding like
I appreciate
even like if in close families if you yell and it's hot like I grew up in Georgia the windows we
Mm,
didn't have air conditioning if there's a fight going on, the neighbors could hear the fight.
Yes,
Even though
yes.
it was a good distance. It wasn't like we were like totally snugged, but oh my gosh, for sure.
But people can hear it. Yeah, people can hear it.
But,
Absolutely.
then I always think about like the bystander and all. That's why I talked about Alexa. Like, I'm like, Alexa's a new neighbor. But it's just, I just think that's how I think about stuff, Tricia. It's just like who, like all the stuff going on at that time and that place, to help our listeners who are all different ages. They're not our age.
That's right.
Hello 50s, but we've got this.
Yes, yes.
Oh, totally. It's like you come into your own, all of a sudden I got nothing to worry about. You get old enough and you've done so much with your career too. I'm so happy you're writing about this. So the thing I was going to go back. So your 5-year-old self, was this how often? I'm thinking frequency. Like, is this nightly?
Yeah.
Is it he comes home or, does he live there? What was that?
He does not live there.
Okay. Nobody's there.
Oh.
So
he didn't live there. Yeah. So he was her, he was her boyfriend, if you will. And they had dated probably right after high school, in high school. And it just, the relationship just continued to mature. Unfortunately, I use that word loosely when I say mature, because it did not mature. In fact, it was one of the most unhealthy experiences I have ever had, and what I will say, that without giving too much detail in the book, because I talk about that, at some point in elementary school, I had my first experience with me actually being a victim of domestic violence, like where I was actually hurt, harmed. And again, when you talk about that role, right? So because I was the protector, and I kind of painted the picture for you in terms of what that looks like. There's an exchange at some point. It's gotten physical. I'm a little girl. I hear my mother yelling and crying. And so as a child, what child wouldn't want to protect their parent, especially their mother? So I stand between the two of them. And as a result of that, I get hurt physically by him, because I stood between the two of them. And in a fit of rage, he not only hurt her, he hurt me physically. So that was that I can recall my first introduction to me actually being a victim.
But I think what's interesting, though, Tricia, when you talk about that is, your instinct was to go run into the fire, not hide from it.
Right.
So you were wired from the get-go as the go into it, not hide from it. So you were already fierce, right?
Yes.
Like you were born fierce.
I was born fierce.
That's what
But
I'm saying,
I didn't always, Katie, always run into the fire. It was, I will tell you, as much as I can recall as a little girl, I think that was the first and the last time, because obviously there was some things that happened to me physically that really harmed me. And it caused me to have to visit and I'll give you a little bit, but I had to go to the emergency room because I was hurt.
Okay.
And so that was probably, that I can recall as a child, the first and the last time that I intervened. But that's when things had totally escalated. It went from my mother being a victim of domestic violence. And now here I am as a child being introduced to not just her journey with DV, but now I have my own story and experience with DV.
Wow. And then I guess I would love to understand. So you're about 5 and this cognizance of what's going on, and how does it progress through middle school and into high school?
Oh, the worst thing.
Okay. Yeah.
The worst. Because I think, for one, it never ended. And it's so interesting. And I write this in a book because so my mother is in a relationship with this guy who she's known since high school or whatever. And he has another relationship. So she is one of 2. And so because they'd known each other, she loved him, whatever. I don't know the situation, but he was in and out. So he did not live with us. we weren't a family or blended family or unit. He was in and out. And so, but my mother was loyal to him. She was loyal to him. Clearly, she loved him in the most unhealthy way. She loved him. She was loyal to him. She wanted to, start a family with him. He was broken. My mother was broken, and he was broken, and so he introduced something to our lives that, honestly, it was something I would never want another child to experience. So I had gotten to the point where I was afraid to go to school because I was afraid to leave my mom. I was afraid to be home for fear of what would happen. My anxiety as a child, the fear, the anxiety, anytime he was around, like I could just feel it in the pit of my stomach. I was always afraid. It was hard for me to sleep. I started hearing, like, going through this experience with my mother's screams, even when they weren't there, when I was a little girl, because those things penetrate your soul and it leaves a scar on you mentally that is really, really hard to heal. It mends, but it never heals. So I went through my whole life from elementary school to middle school to high school, fast forward, which is when my mother was murdered. So I went through my whole childhood dealing with DV, my whole life. My mother passed away. She was murdered when I was 19. Fresh out of high school. There was not a moment in my life from elementary, middle school, and high school where I wasn't experiencing, in some shape, form, or fashion, domestic violence.
And how did that impact a million things, but especially what about relationships with friends or boyfriends?
Absolutely.
Nobody came over.
No, you live in isolation. And I think you alluded to that before. You live in isolation. There are no sleepovers. There are no friends coming over because you have to, as a little girl, I learned to protect my mother's secret. And this eventually was no longer my mother's secret. This was our secret. And so, there's fear of judgment, embarrassment. As a little girl, who's going to want to be my friend if they know that this is going on in my house? Who's going to, for God's sakes, who's even going to want to come to my house to visit me? In a small town community, everybody in the community, for the most part, knew what was going on. No one wants to come to the child's house or to the person's house and run the risk of, all of this happening, the police showing up, all these theatrics is what I like to call it. But there are no friends. Now, did I have a social life? Yes. At some point, I was in high school. I had a boyfriend, and he, unfortunately, at some point got a front row seat to what my life was like behind the scenes. And it was near the end of my mother's life. I would add that it's so interesting. I would add that the guy who started out when I was younger, who was abusive to my mom, that's not the guy who murdered my mom. I would add that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's like a big thing too.
Yeah, these are two different people. It's a terrible story, but these are two different people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he died when this guy who played a major role in my life for a very long time. He died once somewhere, but I think I was either junior or senior, probably a junior in high school is when he died. But then,
and how did he die?
He was murdered.
He was murdered.
Out and about. I don't know what happened. It was a fight.
Not by another woman.
No, not brought by another woman, but he was murdered. And so I learned after he passed away, I think I must have been a junior in high school. I thought this was our chance to rewrite our lives, right? This was our chance to take back our story. My mother and I, when I say we, my mother and I, and at this point I have two younger brothers, my mother and I have gone through so much together from, however far back I can remember, not to wish ill on this guy or his family, but this was our opportunity to start anew. This was our opportunity for her to salvage what was left of her dignity, of her life. And then I'm preparing to graduate from high school soon. So this is a reset for us. But what I learned about my mother is there were a lot of insecurities about her, and there was an energy about her who needed to be, or who gravitated to those types of unhealthy relationships. Because a year or so after he was murdered, she found herself in another unhealthy relationship. And
Mm.
subsequently, this was the guy who took her life. So you ask, out of all the people in the world, you got a get out of jail free card, for lack of a better term. You had an opportunity to hit the reset button to start over. How did you find yourself in the same situation again?
Hey, Trish, I have a question. Did you ever find out who her parents, how they were? Your mom's parents? Like, what did she grow up with? Do you know?
Oh yeah, I wrote about my grandparents. My grandparents, and the first couple of chapters of my book are in honor of my grandparents, because my grandparents did a phenomenal job with not just taking care of their 11 children, 9 girls, 2 boys,
Mm-hmm.
but grandkids. They did a great job. But again, and you got 11 kids, right? And so you grow up, you raise your kids in a rural community, not a lot of access to resources and things like that. We had a very healthy family. Unfortunately, in those types of communities, domestic violence is a thing, So could I contribute it to or tie it back to my grandparents? Absolutely not, because they were the cornerstone of our
Okay.
family. They
Fair.
did a very good
And they
job.
were a good, healthy relationship.
Oh man, I
Do you think
love
that,
my grandparents.
and where did your mom fall in the 11? Like, which
Ooh, that's a
number?
tough one, because when it's so many kids, we
Yeah.
we'll get
Oh,
together now. It's like who
it's like,
came first, who came second, type of
yeah.
thing. I think she
Was she
was
toward the
somewhere.
top and the
Yeah,
middle?
no, she wasn't. So if we say it's 3 tiers, if you will, or 3 levels. So she wasn't in the first bunch. I think she
Mhm.
was in the second bunch. So she was in
Okay,
the
middle
middle bunch.
bunch. Okay.
She was in the middle bunch. And the siblings were very close. The
Okay.
sisters are very close. The brothers were very close. My grandparents just did a really good job. But I write this in the book. I think, obviously, if I can think back to it now, my grandparents had 9 girls, and those girls were very strong. And I can imagine it was really hard trying to find your place, because my mom, from what I learned, was a little bit of an oddball. And I'll tell you why. My mom was absolutely gorgeous, but my mom was one who looked different. So she had red hair, for example, or sandy hair, and her sisters had dark hair, and
Mm,
her features were different, from not strikingly different, but they were, they were all different in their own way, or unique in their own way. And I think when you grow up in those types of families, especially such big families, sometimes it's hard to find your place. And I really think it was hard for my mother to find her place. And so I think where she sought validation came from relationships. And unfortunately, they were unhealthy relationships. But my
mm.
family unit is very close.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to think about like what she saw and how
Mhm.
that was working. But I also think it's different to have 9 girls. Like, you know, boys get treated a lot differently than girls,
Mhm.
especially back then. You know,
Yes,
there's still a
yes.
lot more pressure on girls to go find a husband, right?
Go find it. That's right. And
Yeah.
I think too, if I can add, Katie, I think, and obviously I wasn't there, and this is some of these things are just my assumptions. I
Mm.
I think I learned over as years passed that my mother, my biological father, I think that was my mother's true love, if she had a true.
Okay. Okay.
And I think that she was heartbroken. I know she loved him just from stories that I heard as much as she could. But I think she was heartbroken because that relationship didn't end the way she would have wanted it to have end. I think she was vulnerable at a time where she really adored my biological father. It didn't work out. He went off to school. And I think in that, I think is how she became vulnerable. And I
Mm.
think this is where she started to seek validation. Now, fast forward. So her and my dad don't work out. She's pregnant. She never tells my dad she's pregnant with his child. He leaves off. He leaves this small town and doesn't learn until later, obviously, that he has a daughter. But I think in her brokenness is where she started to gravitate to some of these unhealthy relationships.
Okay, that sounds logical. I guess I want to go back to you and growing up and having kind of been infused with all that violence. How, when you got, I guess maybe we should talk about how your mom died, but then I want to hear more about like how you healed and triumphed eventually.
Yes, that's the important part, right?
I know. We're
That's the important part.
That's the most important part.
Yes, yes.
So there was another guy who she was in, and you were in high school at this point when this guy came in. And what was he like? What do you remember about him? Was he a different type of abuse or similar?
Definitely. He was what I would say more manipulative, more cunning. And so because I had, at this point, once I met him, I had become a force in that house because I'd been through a lot, I'd seen a lot, I'd experienced a lot. And so there was a huge shield, and I was angry and I was bitter and I was combative. And so when she introduced him to our family, if you will, I smelled it a mile away. I could see the manipulation, and she was super excited. She was in a relationship and this guy was going to marry her. But immediately when I met him, I sensed, because I'd been down this path before. So I sensed the amount of manipulation, and I watched how they interact. And I watched the fact that she yet again had become so subdued, and he had taken this role in the home where he was, I am man, hear me roar type thing. So the more he inflated himself, the more she deflated herself. So I kind of saw it coming, but this relationship was a little different because it was definitely more, the other guy was more upfront with it. This guy was more behind the scenes, like the manipulation. It was just, he wouldn't, for example, there would be no exchange between the two of them in front of me. It was only when I left the house. And so there was never any evidence of it until towards the end. I suspected it, but I never really knew it until towards the end. So there was a lot happening behind the scenes that I wasn't privy to. I knew something was wrong, but I really didn't learn about it. It didn't rear its ugly head probably until 6 months up to her death is when I learned about it. So by this time, you're talking about a girl who has been through it all. I've seen it all, been through it all, thought about, I had unhealthy thoughts about taking my own life because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I just wanted out of the situation. And then there was a time in my life where there was a pivot where I no longer felt like a victim. I was ready to take back my power. So when he was introduced into our lives, I was at a point where I was ready to take back my power. I had it. I was done. She wasn't done, but I was done. And so that's when things really started to turn for me. Now, fast forward, the day she was murdered, first of all, she was murdered publicly. That's number one. She was murdered publicly, and I wasn't even there. My younger brothers were there. If I could, I know you would probably prefer.
Public, but I'm not. My brain's going like, are we in a grocery store?
Yes, so I'm going to paint the picture for you, Katie.
I know. I got you.
So that day, it was a Sunday, and I was preparing to go to a friend's baby shower. And at this point, my mother had a job. She was working as a certified nursing assistant at a nursing home. She had just gotten home from work. It was probably about 2:00 in the afternoon. I was on my way to a baby shower, and I'm at this baby shower. And remember, I told you in my role, I was the protector. So I was always fearful of leaving the house. I never knew what was going to happen. So I'm at this baby shower, and something told me to call home just to check on my mom. So I called, nobody answered. Called the house phone, nobody answered. So I did that about 4 or 5 times. By the time I made it back to the baby shower, because I'd gone across the street to use someone's phone, I go back to the community center to the baby shower. By the time I made it back to the baby shower, maybe about 10, 15 minutes later, someone comes in and tells me that one of my aunts, one of my mom's sisters is out. No, what they said to me was, someone's outside looking for you. And I'm like, who's outside looking for me? I'm like a senior in I just graduated high school. I'm like, who's outside looking for me? They're like, I don't know. Somebody's outside looking for you. So I get outside and I'm walking towards the car, and I recognize who's in the car. It's my aunt. It's one of my oldest aunts. She's in the car, and she's like, get in the car. And I'm like, get in the car. She's like, just get in the car. And so she's frantic. I get in the car. I get in the back seat, and we're driving towards my house. And I'm like, again, small town, small community. I was at this baby shower. I live maybe, we'll say 10 minutes away, if that. So I get in the back of my aunt's car. I notice we're driving, and she's frantic. She's cussing. She's screaming. I'm like, what is going on? So finally, she says to me, that MF, she used the cuss words, he stabbed your mom. That's what she said. She said, he stabbed your mom. Now, I just graduated high school. I didn't say anything. I just sat back. And it was quiet. The rest of the ride was quiet. Longest ride of my life. Like I said, we were probably 5 minutes away, 5 to 10 minutes away. So we get to the street where I lived. I lived on a dead end street. So there was one way in, one way out. It was so many people. As we're getting close to my neighborhood, I noticed the number of people in cars in that neighborhood. First thing I noticed, there's helicopters overhead. I'm hearing sirens. I'm seeing all these people standing in the streets. I'm seeing cars. I'm like, what is going on? Well, because there were so many people on my street, we couldn't even drive down the street. We had to park outside of my street and walk. So I don't even remember where my aunt went. I have no idea. I just remember getting out the car and walking that street. So we got out the car. I got to my street. I'm walking towards the dead end of that street, which is where I live. And there are people on both sides of the street. And I could hear them whispering. And I can see them pointing their fingers at me. And so I know they're talking about me. All eyes were on me. So again, there's the sound of the helicopters. I'm hearing police cars. I'm watching these people. They're lined on my street. These people, some of these people I don't even know, but I'm watching them point. And I hear someone say, that's her daughter. So when I heard someone say that, I'm like, OS, what has happened? So I get to the end of the street, and there is someone standing in front of my house in the street, standing in front of my house. So if I'm walking down the street, I was going to veer to the right to go to my house to see what had happened. There was someone standing at the end of the driveway to my house who pointed me the other direction. She said, she's over there. And when I turned left, there were another crowd of people standing in a ditch. And as they fan out, it was my mother laying there. So the crowd fans, she's laying on the ground. And of course they make way for me to stand to come over. And so I'm standing there and I'm looking down, and there is my mother. My mother is, she's covered in blood. She's laying in the ditch. She's motionless. I've got people standing behind me. I've got people standing beside me. I don't know where my little brothers were, but I'm standing there, my mother and I. And that was a pivotal moment for me, because I tell people I went through a range of emotions. First of all, you have to remember I was a child. And I've been through so much of this, protecting this secret for so long. My very first feeling or emotion was embarrassment. I was embarrassed because now everybody knew our secret. I was embarrassed because all of the onlookers and spectators, some of them were in school with me. Some of these people I just graduated with. Some of these kids I just graduated with. We've got parents, we've got strangers, we've got bystanders. And I'm standing over my mother's motionless body, trying to figure out what happened? Like, what just happened? I had only been gone away from the house for about, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half. I'm like, what happened? Why are we here? I'm embarrassed. I'm angry. I'm angry because, wow, I'm angry because my mother has put me in a situation where now my back is up against the wall. She has left me to have to deal with this audience, right? So I'm embarrassed. I got to deal with this crowd. All eyes are on me. I'm fearful. And then I go through this range of emotions, beginning with embarrassment, and I land at compassion and empathy for my mother. So as I'm standing here, I'm standing here because I'm trying to understand what happened. I'm standing here because at some point I start to have a mental conversation with my mother because I knew that was it. I knew that was it. I knew that would be the last time that I would ever see her. And so I'm going through this range of emotions. And all of a sudden, the crowd was no longer there. All of a sudden, I knew I had to use that opportunity to figure out what I was going to do next because so much of my life was about my mother's identity. So much of my life, my identity was consumed by her identity with in her relationship with domestic violence. So now I'm alone. I'm in the spotlight. This was her show, is what I write. This is her show, her movie. She was the leading lady. I was the supporting actress. Now it became mine. This has become my story. And so after just kind of standing there, and it seemed like it took forever because Katie, I didn't know how to turn back to the crowd. These people were watching me. They're waiting to see how I'm going to respond to this. And I could do one or two things. I could drop down to my knees. I could cry. I can scream. But ultimately, I had to figure out how to turn back to this crowd and with some sense of dignity, not just for myself, but for my mother. And so after I finally got to a point where I said my goodbyes, I got into a point where I understood. So first I was embarrassed, then I was angry, then I was frustrated, then I understood. I understood that my mother was not strong enough to walk away to rebuild a life for herself. And at some point before I turned away, I made the decision that where she laid down her life would be where I picked it up. And so that is what gave me the strength. I had to find a purpose in her death. And so the strength for me was, okay, my mother lost her life, but how can I pick it up and change her legacy? And so once I got to that point, standing there over her motionless body, once I got to that point, I was able to lift my head up and turn to the crowd because I was able to turn with purpose. And that's the only way I would be able to walk away from that with any ounce of sanity. I had to find a purpose and what I needed to do next. And once I was able to do that, and I realized my purpose was to change her legacy, once I was able to do that, and I accepted the fact that that would be my purpose moving forward, then I was able to turn to the crowd with my head held high.
So, oh my gosh, Tricia, that was a lot and so powerful. And I could just sit here and probably start reading your book. But I know we only have about 5 minutes, and I wanted to make sure we could talk about the whole, like, you're so powerful now, and this has been such a lot you came from to be where you are now. And I think you maybe could talk about three of the most favorite things, or two, or whatever you think, 2 or 3 of the most helpful things that you have chosen to do that have been successful for you to be so successful. I mean, we started with your career and your leadership, and like you are very, very accomplished. and I'm not saying that you couldn't have done that and still be in trauma, but somehow I feel like you're at a place where you've wrestled with it, and you have decided how you will live through it or with it.
Yes, absolutely. So 3 things that come to mind that have helped me, and it's still a journey for me, which is why there'll be a book 2 and a book 3.
Okay.
It's still a journey for me. But what I would say is from the day my mother passed away, that's when my book ends. My book ends. Chapter 18 is that scene, the day she died.
Okay.
And so
So this will
when
be
I
a
made,
preview of your next book. So I'm ready.
yes, yes.
Give us the
So
top three.
So the top three is one, at that scene, it was purpose. I had to find purpose. And
Mhm.
although that ultimately that would not be my purpose, I needed something to hold on to be able to give myself strength or find strength to continue to move on. So number one, it was purpose. And my purpose was to change, at the time, change her legacy, but it eventually evolved into something else. And then number two, the thing that has helped me the most, to be honest with you, I'm
Mhm.
very spiritual, so prayer.
Okay.
And I'm very strong in terms of my faith. So just faith alone has helped me. And then three, what has also helped me is, to be honest with you, prayer, faith, meditation, and then now I'm thinking when we talk about legacy, it's changed for me. Now my purpose has become, how do I become a voice for others? Like, I know I didn't go through this for just for nothing. I know there is a reason why I went through this. And so how can I be used as a testimony? How can I be used to inspire, empower, and motivate others? Because there are other children right now and women who are going through exactly what I went through. So it's about finding your purpose. And my purpose is, in terms of changing the legacy, how do I become a voice for the voiceless? And that's what gives me the fire and the energy, because I want to be a testimony to someone else. I want people to know, in spite of what your story may have been, you have the power to change your story. You can rewrite your entire narrative so that when people see you, they don't see my trauma. You see what I want you to see. I choose to share my trauma with you. And I choose to share my trauma with you because I want to make sure that no other child, no other woman has to experience what I experience.
That's beautiful. It's just beautiful, Tricia. And I think you are absolutely going to accomplish all of those things. And,
True.
being the voice for the voiceless is also like helping. I think you're a really powerful way for other survivors to find their own voice. So you're
That's
giving
right.
them an example, and you're making it accessible. Like nothing's shameful. I like how you went through, feeling the shame and embarrassment, and then freeing yourself. And when we start to say to ourselves, what others do to us does not define us. It is what we do with what has happened that defines us. And you
Mm-hmm.
are such a powerful example of that. And I'm so, I think it's, I was another layer of what, listening to you for me is I was 18, right? When I was, going through this, I will stand alone for the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
I will not be ashamed. He should be ashamed.
That's right.
I will stand here with my name and my face and be a survivor. And
That's right.
you were looking down at your mom at that same age, practically, and saying, I will be a name and a face for my mother's
That's right.
story that will become so many other stories. So there's we're on different exact, like the path isn't the same, but I think what's like another thing I encourage our listeners to think about is your 18-year-old self. Like
That's
there's
right.
so many of us who have, we get to this powerful moment as young teenagers where we decide to be strong, and sometimes yours was not by choice, nor was mine, but we
Mm-hmm.
chose how we decided to move forward from it. So
And
I'm
you said one thing, Katie,
yeah.
one thing that you said that I love, the power of storytelling. I
Mhm.
think what has helped me heal is when you talk about the shame and the embarrassment, you take away the sting when you find the courage to tell the story. The
Yep.
more you tell the story, the more it looses you or you feel liberated. So there is no more shock factor that I have to worry about anymore. Nothing that imprisons me, whether it's in my body or in my mind. Over the years, I've told this story so many times that it has liberated me. And I think if we as human beings, if we focus on that human connection and the power of storytelling, you'll learn that there are so many people out in the world who share similarities and
Mhm.
just because we are imprisoned in our mind for fear of embarrassment and judgment, I think if we could just release and break those shackles, that's where some of the healing starts as well. It's in the power of storytelling.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would also, it's so lovely talking with you. But I think also another thing that comes to mind too is like, I grew up one way and we both grew up down south, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a different, like, Louisiana versus Georgia, there's lots of, like, when I think about finding connections with stories and also lived experiences, they don't have to be like we watched the same show, we loved the same, we went to the same concert. Like there's like the way that we feel and experience things, even though those things, whatever the thing is, might be different. Like I find the connection is how we feel, right? Like how I feel about, it's like that emotion of shame or that emotion of anger, and I'm going to just fight and fight. Like, don't shut me up.
That's right.
I'm going to punch you in the face if you shut me up.
Exactly.
Like I could be talking about a million different things, but that like that instant like bristle, or I loved you. I think it was so powerful. I love how descriptive you are, and I'm sure your book is so exciting to read in that way. But it's like I can see being in the room next door and hearing, the arguments and hearing the thud. That was like, I appreciate that willingness to talk about those details with our listeners, because I hope that our listeners will come from this episode with always like a zillion things, like write them all down. And then go back and listen again. Like I always say, listen to an episode again after you've done some more work on yourself, and then come back. You're going to hear something you didn't hear that time. And the gift for me is being able to meet each and every one of our guests like today. So Tricia, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll meet again on book number 2 or 3, I'm certain.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, listeners. Oh my goodness. Please check out Tricia's book out in August.
A Lotus Legacy.
Yeah, Lotus Legacy. And then
in August.
August. And hopefully we'll be pushing this right out around the same time, so you can instantly listen and go look it up.
Perfect.
Yes, 100%. And then keep that journal going. Just do the self-care, good stuff. And we have purpose, prayer, meditation, and voice. So lots of great stuff from Tricia.
And then can I offer up my website really quickly?
Yeah, of course.
My website.
Yeah, we'll put it in show notes too. But go ahead.
Perfect. So it's www.triciangray, TRICIAN as in Nancy, GRAY.com. So TriciaNGray.com.
Yep. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Tricia. Be well, and we'll look for your next book. And listeners, tune in next week. We'll have a brand new podcast for you. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary. And we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.